Good evening, Simsy.
All right.
How are you?
Are you all right?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'm looking forward to tonight.
So am I. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Mystery Hour. And just want to say good evening to Lee, who's been sponsoring the Mystery Hour for 6 months now.
Been a while, hasn't it? Yeah.
That's been a while,
That's
yeah.
good. Yeah.
So he must be doing good work, mustn't he, somewhere? My guest this evening, good evening, George.
Good evening, Alan.
Is George Cranley. And George is the publicity officer and editor of the Noah's Ark Society. And now this is the definition of what the society does: a worldwide educational society for the promotion, development and safe practice of physical mediumship. There's a mouthful, George.
It certainly is.
What do you do then?
Well.
What do you do?
I'm the publicity officer and the editor of the Ark Review.
Yeah, but what does the Noah's Ark Society
What does the Noah's Ark
really do?
Society do? It seeks to do exactly what you've just said on the front cover, which is basically to promote and to educate the public, and those interested, basically, in physical mediumship, to explain what it is by means of teaching seminars, by the holding of seances, to which members only are invited. The idea being, of course, that we want people to get this phenomena and this type of mediumship in their own homes. Around about the turn of the century, home circles were formed, usually from families, and in at least almost every family you will find at least one person who has mediumistic powers.
Really?
Yep. And when they do that, and they can develop these powers, it might be clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, it might be transfiguration, direct voice, materialization, automatic writing, spirit photography. One can go on and on. They will receive evidence of survival, that life is continuous. And that's what we seek to promote.
So, George, how long have you been in this, involved in this?
Just on 40 years now.
Yeah, and you've seen an awful lot in your time,
Well,
haven't you?
I know you're probably saying to yourself, how can this be? You look so young.
Yeah.
But
Well, I was about to say that, but you know, now that you said it, I need to go on with it.
well, I know you're psychic.
Oh.
But,
This is very true. Yeah.
sorry, I forgot the question.
The question was that you must have seen, in those 40 years, you must have seen some extraordinary things.
I think I've experienced every type of phenomena that it's possible to see, right up to full form materialization.
I don't want to rush into that one, because
No,
that's
we'll
the
come
sort
back
of...
to that later.
yeah, I would really like to deal with that as something later on. I was very privileged. I mean, you invited me to... you actually do call them a séance, don't you?
Yes. Well,
In
a
how-
séance, only a séance, I pronounce it, because séance or séance simply means a meeting. That's all.
Well, I joined one of your meetings in Hove, I think it was 3 years ago?
3 years ago.
About
yeah.
3 years ago. And I've said it on this programme many, many times, that I actually experienced direct voice for the first time then, and it was an absolutely fantastic thing.
It is.
But it is also a fantastic thing for people listening to the programme to get around an experience where you could actually hear a voice coming from another dimension. Do you have any concept of what that dimension is composed of, George?
Well, I can only tell you, Alan, what they've told me. I have actually been in contact with, I think, almost everyone I've ever known who's lived on Earth, been friends or loved ones, and they have contacted me at some time or another since their passing. I have no doubt that life is continuous. The world, I suppose, you could say, the world you go to is very similar in the beginning to the one we're living in now. And for many people, that probably means little change. It's why many people don't believe they're dead. They can't. They still see things as they were. All they know is that people to them on Earth don't seem to see them, and that's where the difficulty comes in. And because they've been probably misled through their life on Earth, the religious teachings and so on, believing they may have to stay in the grave for 100 years, 1,000 years, until some mysterious trumpet sounds, they find it often very difficult to come to terms with survival. The truth is that life is continuous, and 1 second after you pass over is exactly the same as it was 1 second before. Death is an illusion. Probably the greatest lie, as a spirit friend said recently, the greatest lie ever told to man, that death is the end. It is just an incident. One passes out of the body and continues living. See, we often hear, I heard jokes on television this morning about spirits and scornful remarks, but the thing is, we are spirits now, living temporarily in a physical body, which is our house for the time we're on Earth. When you vacate your house, the house will crumble, fall away, deteriorate, disintegrate, but you carry on. And if you move from one house to another, it's exactly the same.
Why is it then that it appears to me that the people that have passed into the next dimension, you're saying, find it very difficult to comprehend why we can't see them, and can they actually see us?
Sometimes. Not always, but they certainly...
It's not, yes. So they don't have a better view of things.
No.
We have an equal view of them as they have of us, which is very limited.
Well, I asked a spirit friend once, I said, how do you see us? What do we look like? And he replied, you look like ghosts to me.
Really? Really?
Because to them, the world they live in is solid, as our world here is solid to us. But it's a much finer vibration. For example, if you had a fan and you could see the blades, and you switched it on, the blades went faster and faster till it virtually becomes invisible. The blades are still there. They've just become invisible to sight. And this other world that we talk about is here now. We're in it now. We're sitting in it, in this studio, in the spirit world.
Is that...
Except that it's closed to our vision.
Yeah, is that... where that expression comes from, worlds within worlds.
Worlds within worlds.
So we're actually living. There are other worlds...
all around us.
All around us now.
Walking through here all the time. Haven't frightened anybody yet.
No, not at all. We haven't frightened me yet. It's just, I think it's not a question of frightening.
No, I just saw somebody run through the wall.
As complete. Oh, you no, you didn't. It's not so much frightening, but it's confusing, and it's very, very difficult for people, I think, to get their head around this difference. And maybe the whole secret, no, not maybe, certainly the whole secret is vibration, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And I wonder what Dawkins would say about that. My favourite man. That I've got to have my moment here, because I've never been so angry as I was the other day when, what's his first name?
Richard.
Richard Dawkins was on BBC television and was absolutely categorically saying that, you know, death was final, and that was it. And he said it with such arrogant authority.
It's wonderful
I
to be
can't
so
believe
knowledgeable,
that it must be wonderful to be that knowledgeable, you know. Completely, I mean, he wouldn't even peer into the sort of evidence that has been produced by societies like the Noah's Ark Society over a long period of time. Very substantial evidence, which I've been privileged to experience. What else have you seen, George?
Well,
so let's forget about Dawkins, or unless you want to say something really bad.
Well, he is an atheist. And an atheist, as you know, Alan, is somebody who has no invisible means of support.
I love that.
But let's move on.
Moving on. Right, so what other things have you seen, George? Don't tell me about the full materialisation yet, because that's so wonderful.
I'll tell you how it started.
I was reading in here the other day with little hands and things appearing.
Shall I tell you how it started? I lived in Cape Town in South Africa, and for many years I was investigating, as a young person, investigating all the religions. And every Saturday night I would pick up the local paper and I'd pick a different church to go to. I went to a mosque, synagogue, Christadelphians, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Christadelphians. You can go on and on. I spent a lot of time and became very disillusioned. Saw no purpose in life other than you must have faith. And the very last church I came to was a spiritualist church, an advertisement. I had no idea what it meant. And I went along and I was met at the door by the medium's husband, who said to me, I later discovered he was a psychologist. He said, do you know anything about this subject? And I said, not a thing. And he said, you're the ideal person we want. I want you to go in, listen to everything that takes place, and give me your honest opinion at the end. And I went in, and I saw this medium at work, Mona, her name, Mona van der Walt, Scottish medium who'd married a South African psychologist. And I heard, for the first time, independent voice in the light. It came from the region of her right shoulder, and you could hear the spirit people talking to her as she relayed what they were saying to the public. Well, I assumed that every medium was like this, falsely as it came to be. But at that time, I thought this was how mediums worked. And I came out, and I was full of questions, and I think the service finished at 7:45. And I cross-examined her and her husband for 5 hours continuously. I didn't realise the time had gone until she said, I'm going to bed. And I asked what the time was, and they said it's 1:45 in the morning. And everybody had gone, and I was still there. And I walked to the door with her husband and questioned him for another half an hour on the doorstep. I couldn't wait to get to the library the next day because he recommended 2 books, which many people have read. One was On the Edge of the Etheric by Arthur Findlay.
Brilliant book, yes.
And This is Spiritualism by Maurice Barbanell, who was the editor of Psychic News for over 50 years. And I went into the library and I asked for books on spiritualism. Well, The lady behind the desk, you would have thought I'd said the filthiest word imaginable. She spat it out, spiritualism. Sorry, Alan, didn't mean to hit you in the eye.
It's all right.
But 133.9, she said. I never forgot that number to this day. She pointed to the shelf. I went over, found this book, and it started from there. And it just went on and on and on. And I can say that once you start on the spiritual path with sincere intent, you will never be disappointed.
Yes, one of the things that comes up time and time again in the Mystery Hour with many, many of the guests is that the evidence is there if people want to go and find it. You won't get it by just sitting about and maybe just listening to
never come
programs.
to you. No.
No, you've got to go out and look for it, haven't you? Yeah.
Well, I think you won't get conclusive evidence in one go. My conviction of the continuity of life is based on continuous evidence, which is built up until I have a conviction which no one can shift. You see, my answer to the skeptics always is this, and I've debated this many times on television. I've had the experiences, and they haven't. They can pick something out and knock it about and say, well, that could have been this, could have been that. But when you have accumulative evidence, such as you get in a court of law is evidence there in a trial is based on probability. And that's what the judge and the jury look at. Is it probable based on the evidence supplied? And that's why I often feel that barristers, lawyers and so on are the best qualified to assess the evidence.
Right.
And a good example of that was Sir Edward Marshall Hall, of course, King's Counsel, who wrote about his experiences.
What did he have to say?
Well, he was absolutely convinced because he received evidence that was beyond a doubt. And he was a man who was used to assessing evidence. And there are many others who have followed in their footsteps.
What is the, I mean, obviously, the Noah's Ark Society depends heavily on mediums. So what is the role of the medium in all this?
The medium is a channel for communication. They have a particular power or a gift, talent, if you like, which is possessed by very few of the population. There's a certain substance, the life force or something like that, which are having greater quantity than perhaps the average person. There are many people walking the streets today in various religions who probably have this power, but frightened of it or maybe put off by the priests who tell them it's evil and so on. So it's lost to humanity where they could be of service.
George, are there as many mediums out there today as there have always been? Because it seems to me there was a period in time when this mediumship and spiritualism was a great deal stronger and was taken more seriously by more serious people, if you like. You know, some really big, some very big minds and very big scientific minds were involved in spiritualism, but it seemed to be at an earlier stage. Now science seems to
have moved back
from that completely, you know, as with Dawkins, you know.
Yes. Well,
I mean, the man just won't even enter into it. You know, won't even think about it.
And they won't investigate the experiments that scientists have carried out in the past.
Yeah, well, that's what I told the BBC when I phoned up in complete anger, you know, saying that there's a lot of scientists and a lot of scientific evidence which would conflict with what Dawkins was saying.
Well,
you know.
take, for example, the Society for Psychical Research, which is over 100 years old. Their archives are crammed with evidence, if anyone wishes to investigate. And many have done so. There's Professor David Fontana, Professor Archie Roy. David Fontana is a psychologist. Archie Roy is astrophysicist.
Is he still active, George?
Oh, very.
Is he?
Very much so. He'd be surprised to hear you say that, Alan.
Yeah, well, he probably would. Yes, I just don't see his name cropping up to us. Has he changed a bit? I mean, what's he doing now? What
well,
sort of...
he's still an astronomer, as he always was.
Yeah.
And he's still the head of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research.
And he's had
He's had a number of experiences.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of the name of his book, which has been published recently. It'll come back to me later.
Right.
3 things happen to you when you get old, Alan.
Yes.
1, you forget things very easily, as you well know.
Sorry?
I can't remember the other 2.
I think we're going to take a break soon, aren't we, Simsy? And then we're going to come back and we want to talk.
He's laughing his head off.
Talk a lot about what you've actually seen, George, because that is quite remarkable.
And heard,
yeah. Okay.
All right, we'll take a minute.
The weather with Hayward's Carpets of Hailsham.
Some patchy cloud in there. Control yourself. Be some patchy cloud and the risk of rain for a while along the south coast, but this will soon... I don't want to talk about it.
The Mystery Hour is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
Right, back to the mystery hour. It was a bit of a mysterious break too, wasn't it, George? Watching the inner workings of Sovereign here.
My lips are sealed.
It's good fun, isn't it? George, tell us about some of the things that you've seen and heard.
Well, I'll deal with direct voice first, independent direct voice, which you've experienced yourself. It started, as I say, with this lady in South Africa. It was followed by my experiences with Leslie Flint, a famous direct voice medium for over 50 years, 60 years.
Did you go to some of his?
I spent probably 10 years, I think, on a regular basis.
Oh, wonderful.
Once a fortnight. My family communicated. And after a while, you know, when you've had evidence of survival and so on, you want to know more. And our circle developed, there was 8 of us used to meet with Leslie regularly, developed into a question and answer session. And we used to question spirit people on, are there seasons, for example, in the spirit world? Can you go ice skating? Do you have tea and biscuits if you feel like it? Things like that.
What did they say?
Questions. Yeah, they answer them all very well.
Well, do they?
You can have anything you like.
Really?
Which, of course, led me to ask various other questions. What is the source of your electricity? But, of course, it doesn't work like that. The desire creates the object. The emotional desire for something will allow it to be created.
Is it the emotional desire or the mental desire? Do we still carry our emotions with us then?
Certainly, and they're very much heightened.
Really? Oh,
very much heightened. Well, it may sound like that to you now, but when you get there, you'll find it probably a great help. Because you'll be able to see people for what they really are. No one can escape. Here we can wear a mask, our personality, but there it's revealed to all. You radiate colours. Everyone can read you like a book, as you can read others. And it makes you change your life, if only it happened on Earth. And many people have regrets that they didn't live a better life.
Is that the point of life, though, George?
Well, I find you the point of life. I wouldn't be here.
Well, no, that's exactly what my question is really leading to, is whether, you know, we're here to have a fuller realisation of ourselves.
Well, all I can tell you is what the spirit people say from their own knowledge, and of course their knowledge changes as they advance. But basically, we're here to be of service to others, and to lead as full a life as we can in every way, to use all our talents and abilities, which will prepare us for the life to come, where there are greater opportunities, and as you move on, even greater opportunities. Scientists, chemists, doctors, for example, can all expand their talents tremendously. And many doctors, nurses, and people like that come back to help doctors, nurses, healers on Earth.
So they're developing their ideas, if you like, in spirit, or in that dimension.
Yes.
And then they're communicating through people of a similar sort of... If they wish to. No. Of a similar sort of makeup, if you like, or a chemist or a doctor.
That's right.
And they can put those ideas into that.
The wonderful thing I like about the spirit world, Alan, is that unlike here, you don't have to be with people you don't like. The law of like attracts like is very prevalent there. So you're attracted to people, or you're with people of similar mental and emotional mental abilities and emotional...
That sounds attractive, doesn't it?
It is, very attractive.
So if you were...
And what a relief to think, I'll no longer see that person again.
Go on, keep telling us. This is absolutely intriguing, George. Tell us more about...
I was going to have a sip of this
that bottle of whiskey down.
that you put down.
Go on then, quickly, and I'll ask you another question when having a sip of that.
And recently, with a young man who lives not far from here...
is this Colin?
I hope you will have him on your programme in due course.
Colin?
Colin, yes. I had a 27-minute conversation with a friend who passed over 16 months before.
Do you want to tell us what Colin is, because we don't know
Colin
yet.
is a physical medium.
Yeah.
In addition to that, he's also clairvoyant, which is unusual to find two in the same person. But he has a particular talent and a particular gift, which he's put at the service of humanity. And in this particular seance I went along, my friend, who'd been a medium himself for over 60 years, communicated in his own voice, instantly recognisable, came out and shook my hand, kissed my friend's hand, who was sitting next to me, and she said to him, "Oh, hello, Gordon." He turned to her and said, "Oh, hello, my dear," and kissed her on the hand. Now, that may sound like nothing at all, but when he was on Earth, he could never remember her name, always called her my dear, and never kissed her on the cheek or whatever, but only ever on the hand, which was marvellous evidence in itself. And he was emotional, He was happy, he was sad, as we discussed many things that we'd arranged to do before he passed. And I have that 27 minutes of it on tape.
Gosh, wonderful.
Wonderful, yeah. That was a classic example of direct voice. So not only have I spoken to all my family, sorry for interrupting you, but I've spoken to my friends, and I know they survive, and I'm aware of their presence all the time.
Right. Does that give you a deep peace, George, that? I mean, you're a bit of an old devil, aren't you? I mean, you rustle things up as you go along, but I mean, inside, you must have a deep peace.
It gives you an inner peace.
Yeah.
I was looking for, I suppose, a philosophy to live by, and I found it, and nothing will shift it. You know, I have an inner peace which I can't give to anybody else, but I can only tell them that if they make the investigation in a sincere frame of mind and push, you don't have to be gullible, and you can be sceptical, but don't be openly hostile. Have an open mind. And if you investigate with an open mind, I'm sure, and a sincere mind, you will get the evidence you need.
Absolutely.
And that leads you on to other things, because it then asks you, what about vivisection? What about abortion? Euthanasia? What spiritual principles are involved here?
What you're actually saying is that from that point on, once you're open-minded, and once you've accepted the reality of spirit, then you're open also to be enriched, aren't you?
That's
you're open
right.
to the wisdom that can come from spirit.
Yeah.
Tell us about the time when you saw the full materialization.
Full materialization.
Yeah. Please
Well,
tell us about that. Where and when and what was
This
it
took
like?
place in Johannesburg through a medium called Alec Harris, who was probably one of the most brilliant physical mediums we've ever had. Between him and his wife, they had the gift of materialization. Nothing would happen unless she was present.
Right.
So it was a joint mediumship. And I was invited to a séance through a friend of my mother's who'd been a lifelong spiritualist. And when she discovered my interest in spiritualism, she said, would you like to attend a materialization séance? And I said, yes, please, I'd love to. I received a telegram in Cape Town the following week, said, séance tomorrow night, can you come? I hopped on a plane, flew 1,000 miles to Johannesburg to take part in the séance. Only 8 of us were present. I was in the front row, 4 chairs in front, 4 behind, in front of a little curtained-off part of the room, which I used as what we call a cabinet, where the power is conserved for demonstration purposes. And so I sat next to the medium's wife, and we sang as they do, just to harmonise the vibrations.
Does that increase energy as well?
Well, apparently, I don't think it helps spirit people a great deal, because they're pretty harmonious anyway, but it certainly helps to harmonise the minds and the senses of the people present. It creates a vibration, obviously, but it creates a harmony and a sense of oneness.
Right.
Well, to cut a long story short, the first person to appear was a Red Indian.
And they actually appeared?
He walked out the cabinet and stood in front of my friend, whose name was Teddy, and she's still alive today. She's well in her 80s now, and still living in South Africa. And she said, greetings, Blackfeather. And he was had a black feather in a band around the top of his head. He was half naked, and people often ask me, was it naked from the waist up or naked from the waist down? Well, he was naked from the waist up, so put your mind at rest.
Yeah.
And he suddenly turned and said, will the young man from Cape Town come forward? But in a very deep voice. The young man from Cape Town, come forward. So I jumped to my feet and went up to him. Now, bearing in mind, I'd been told not to touch the materializations unless invited to do so, because in some mysterious way it could damage the medium. Well, now I know why. Because there is a link between the medium, part of his life force, and any sudden shock or movement would mean the ectoplasm out of which these figures are built would shoot straight back into the medium's body and cause him either to hemorrhage or something
like an
that.
electric shock
Yeah,
almost.
well, even
isn't it?
worse than that.
Yeah.
But this Indian said to me, feel my skin. And I put my hand up, rather trembling, thinking I mustn't be too, in case it falls apart, it mustn't be too heavy. And it was copper-coloured, leathery to the feel, and I had to reach up, bearing in mind that Alec Harris was a young man. And this Indian then said to me, feel my chest. I put my hand on his chest, felt it, and it was solid as a rock. I was going to say as solid as yours, but I've never felt your chest, Alan.
I don't think you've granted that one,
Not
George,
like
but
me,
anyway,
you are.
no, not at all.
But he said, hit me on the chest. And I did. And he said, harder. And again I did. He never flinched. And he said, harder still. So I summoned up all my energy and whacked him on the chest. And I was a lot younger then. He never moved, and then he said, with a slight smile creeping across his face, "You may sit down now." And he walked back behind the curtain, having said goodbye. And as he walked behind the side of the curtain, out of the front, appeared a young lady, holding in her arms a baby. Now, how you could convert Alec Harris, a small man of small stature, into a woman with a baby, I don't know.
Right.
No skeptic.
So, I mean, the medium is screened off in a sort of cabin. So it's a very small area.
Very small area.
Yeah.
Indeed. All he was doing was sitting on a chair. He was dressed in black pyjamas, so that any substance that came out could be seen clearly against that background.
Yeah. And out came the lady with the baby.
Yep. And I heard somebody behind me crying, and she held the baby up for all to see. And I discovered later, in conversation with somebody, that she'd passed while giving birth to the baby. Mother and baby had passed together. Well, the next one that came out was rather astonishing, because I couldn't see the man's face. Shrouded in this, like, white covering, I could only see half a face. And again I heard a lady behind me saying, "Is that you, Uncle Arthur?" And the figure nodded. And I thought, well, that's strange, why doesn't he speak? And she was sobbing, and the figure disappeared. And she explained afterwards that her Uncle Arthur had cancer of the face. And before he died, half his face had been eaten away, he'd been unable to speak. A little Cockney boy came out and asked me to come forward to feel his nose. I felt his nose, which was squashed flat against his face. And he said, "Do you know how I got that, mate?" And I said, "No, mate." He said, "I was hit on the nose by a tomato." And I said, "A tomato?" And he went, "Yeah, it was in a can." Well, of course, it made everybody laugh and lifted the atmosphere. And he shuffled around, talked to a few people. But I suppose the highlight for me was that a man came out wearing the most beautiful robes, and they all followed in very quick succession, and many relating the ones that related to me. I seemed to be the only one who was called up that night. But he stood in front of me, and somebody said, "And who are you?" He said, "The young man from Cape Town, come forward." And I was literally closer to him than I am to you. And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am one of your guides, your helper." And I said, "What's your name? Will you tell me?" And he told me his name, which nobody's managed to pick up yet, and where he came from. And we had a conversation for between 10 and 15 minutes.
Gracious me.
Now, can you imagine? Here is this solid being. And I thought to myself, well, somehow or other, I've got to get hold of you. And I said, "Could I touch your robes?" And he said, "No, please don't, but I will show you." And he opened his arms wide, showing his most beautiful robes. And I said, "Would it be mind if I held your hands?" I wanted to feel what they felt like. He said, "Certainly." And then I thought, now I've got hold of your hands, I thought, I'm not letting go until I get to the bottom of this. Little realising that your mind is an open book. And we chatted for about, anything 10 to 15 minutes, and he said, "You know, you're going to do this work for the spirit world, etc. In the years to come, you and I will work together." And I thought, what a load of rubbish. I couldn't speak in public. I wouldn't have dreamt of speaking in public. And he said, "We will work together, you will see," and so on. And he went on to explain the things that were going to happen in the future, which have all come to pass, as he predicted. Then he suddenly said, "Well, I've got to go now." And I held his hands, and I thought, well, I'm not letting go. But something made me look down at his feet, and I watched the bottom half of his body dissolving, just like vanishing. I still held his hands, half the body had gone. And then I still had my fist clenched, and it just melted away through my fingers. I was left with clenched fists as his head sunk slowly to the floor.
That must have been absolutely categorical proof to you then. I mean, you needed to...
Well, it was fascinating.
You needed to experience that, didn't you?
I certainly did.
Because even you could have still been doubting that the people coming from behind the curtain would have
There he was going in front of my eyes.
But
not behind the curtain, but in front of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the head went down to the floor. Just the head left and said, "I'm going."
Yeah.
Right at the end.
So you really are... I mean, you've been very blessed, George, haven't you, to have had those experiences?
Oh, yes.
I think you have.
Not many of us left.
No.
Well, I tell you what happened at the end, Alan, if I may. Just
Please
quickly.
do, yeah.
The curtains parted, and a voice said, "We have no more time. Now our time's gone." 3 hours went by while this took place. From the medium solar plexus, we could see him slumped in the chair. This great cloud of ectoplasm came, forming a huge mass to the left and another mass to the right, and hundreds of miniature faces appeared in the ectoplasm. And a voice said, "These are just a few of the people who are here tonight but have been unable to communicate."
Gracious.
Curtains closed with unseen hands, and it was all over.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful experience, George. I could sit here listening forever. We haven't got the time.
Sounds good.
One thing I'd like to ask you particularly, and it actually troubles me, it doesn't trouble me, but I'm curious about it. Why is it always conducted in the dark?
I was waiting for that question.
Yeah, well, you said earlier on, actually, you did hear direct voice from in the light, which was unusual. Why?
Well, it's not always conducted in the dark. The seance I've just described to you was conducted in red light. There were 6 red light bulbs in the room, so it was as clear as this room is now.
Right.
I could see everything. Certainly in the early stages when they're developing, it is explained to us that white light is extremely harmful to ectoplasm. Red light is not so dangerous. Blue light seems to be okay. Some mediums have worked with blue lights. And a very rare few have developed to such a stage that materializations can be seen in the light. But as far as direct voice goes, there's no reason why it should be in the light any more than in the dark.
Right.
Because it's the evidence that counts. It's what you hear. You're using your ears. Materialization, unless you can see what's happening, it's rather pointless being in the dark.
I actually have heard direct voice in the light. I wasn't in the room, but I heard this. We left a house once. This voice was talking to us, and I said to this chap when we went out, that chap wanted to have a word with you. Who is he? He said, he said that's I can't remember his name. Is a Frenchman or something, Francois or something. I said, but he wanted to tell you something. Why didn't you go in there? He said, Francois is dead. He said, but he often talks to us. And it was as loud again as you're talking to him.
At the end of one séance, I remember quoting the famous medium D.D. Hume. Somebody said to the communicator, "If only you were here to have heard what would happen." And the voice replied, "We are not dead." They're not dead.
Right. What a lovely point to end on. George, is there any way in which people can, make inquiries about the Noah's Ark Society?
Well, certainly, Alan. I'm sure you'll be pleased to supply details if you have them.
I will. If anybody wants details about the Noah's Ark Society, do write to me, Alan Pemberton at Sovereign Radio, and what's that address?
P.O. Box 1075, BN 27180. If you didn't get it, just give us a call and we'll read it out to you.
Absolutely. George Cranley, thank you very, very much indeed for absolutely wonderful Mystery House, and I could go on talking more and more about that. Have a word. I'm going to ring Colin. I'd love Colin to come on.
I'm sure he'd be
Colin's
delighted.
the medium, and I'd love him to come on. If you're listening, Colin, I'd love you to come on to the Mystery Hour.
I'm sure he is.
And get your point of view. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in tonight, and next week I hope to have Colin Fry here. If not, we'll have somebody equally as interesting. So thank you very much, Simsy.
Nice
just reminds me to say good night to everybody, and thank you very much again, George, for coming in.
The